Hello? Can you hear that? The fire alarm is going off! Quick! Everyone get into a single file line and walk out the door so we can take attendance! Also, make sure you stay quiet in the hallways, okay? And that, ladies and gentlemen, and people who don't fall into either category, or perhaps also both categories, is how the school system, or at least the public school system where I grew up, expects us to exit a school when there is a fire. It's honestly laughable that this is the procedure, and I would not be the first person poking fun of it, and I most certainly will not be the last. Fires are definitely not jokes, and shouldn't be played with. But the way these establishments for children handle them, that sure is a joke. Anyway, I am SupernovaBlade, and for this volume of Stories in History, I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences with fires and fire alarms and the like. Because let me tell ya, I have had quite the stories to tell for this topic, so I'm willing to share them all to the world. But first, let me talk about the art in the background. What I did for the background was a little bit different than the previous parts. The background is a photograph I slightly recolored in Metabank Paint for a college project, but it is mainly still, and the changes are so small and too microscopic to be noticed. So, I'm just going to make the excuse that it's just a still image of a tree as the background. I won't be posting this on my socials anytime soon. Actually, I'm not even sure if I even will. So instead, I'll just say, if you want to keep up with my content, my links to all of my different social medias will be down in the description below. Anyway, onto the fire alarm stories. If I'm going to be honest, there really isn't a super large amount of silly fire alarm stories, but before I reach those main courses, let me talk about some of my first recollections of fire alarms. And by that I mean those loud, obnoxious beeping things that happen at school sometimes. I went to a school that actually had fire alarms that sounded like, well, fire alarms. They often meant there was a fire, and it left us alarmed, hence the name. I remember how loud they were and how they caused flashing all over the place, and our reactions would wager from, oh shit, the fire alarm is going off, to, well, time to do our whole spiel again. Once I got to middle school, our fire alarms sounded a little bit different, but they were still the loud and obnoxious beeping that you'd usually associate with a fire alarm. Once I got to high school, the fire alarms were more like announcement things, asking us to leave the building and get whatever the heck dealt with in a timely manner. Or at least, I think they were like that, because I legit can't remember what they sounded like for the life of me. So that was just a legit guess. The thing about fire alarms in schools for me is that they are often not too memorable. Except for two main stories that I'll explain later. They just kinda happen, usually as drills. Sometimes there are actual fires that happen, sometimes there aren't. Mostly they're just drills, but it's always important to know about fire safety. But contrary to what the school system wants you to know from the beginning joke I made and how other people have joked about it in YouTube videos and the like, the proper way to deal with a fire inside of the building that you are in is not to try to get a bunch of kids into a single file line and have them casually walk out the door. I know why they do this, but still. You want to make sure everyone evacuates in a rather quick and speedy manner to prevent bigger tragedy. What I remember most about these fire alarms is just how they were so loud. Even though fire alarms are usually unplanned, which why the hell would they? I have a rather faint memory of being in like 2nd grade or something like that, and I read the schedule, as you do. And I saw something kind of peculiar in the schedule. It said something like, from 2:15 to 3 o'clock, fire drill, or something like that. I think it was like the 2nd day of school or something like that. So I had to do what I could to just not question it. When my teacher went over the schedule, apparently she threw students like me in for a loop because we didn't actually have a fire drill. We were just learning about fire drills. The other very faint memory I had was the time I was in aftercare, which I was in from kindergarten through 4th grade because my parents didn't want me taking the bus at such young of an age. And for some reason, one of the preschool teachers started imitating the sound of our fire alarm and bringing all her students with her like a mother duck bringing her ducklings to the pond. I have seriously no reason to remember this. Why? That's a very good question. Once I got to college, there was a lot less of a focus on fire alarm safety since we were adults at this point. The first dorm I was in for my first year had a fire alarm go off several times. Some when I was inside of it, some when I was not. These fire alarms were different though. since they just had a siren sound going on and off and a voice saying, "Attention, attention, an emergency has been detected in your building," over and over and over until it stopped. And that was basically it. It's not too out of the ordinary for when you're just doing your own thing in the middle of the day and it happens. But it does get very annoying and frustrating when it happens at 3 a.m., which it did for me. Welcome to college. Long story short, some dumbass burnt their popcorn at 3 a.m. and woke everyone up, including me. I really gotta feel bad for the people who were taking a shower during when this was happening. I was very pissed for two major reasons. One, it was 3 a.m. and I was trying to sleep, and the fire alarm going off disturbed my sleep. Two, this happened in the final month of the school year, so I was this close to going the entire school year without getting woken up by some dumbass who can't properly microwave popcorn without waking up 100 people. However, there was one particular other fire alarm related story that happened in my first year dorm. I will say, this was one of the scariest situations I have ever been involved in my entire time of college thus far. It happened on a Tuesday morning, and I had gotten back from my first class of the day. After the class had concluded, I went back to my room to finish the homework assignment that was due by the following class period. Due to being a little bit hungry afterwards, I went to go get some brunch from the cafeteria to satisfy my hunger, as I do. I exited my dorm towards the staircase, but I could have sworn I was hearing an alarm going off towards the staircase I usually take. I'd originally thought, well, that is odd. Where's this alarm coming from? Except, when I walked towards the door, right in front of me, there was an emergency exit door ajar and a passed out body down on the ground, keeping it from closing properly. Mortified, I immediately closed the door and pulled out my phone and called University Police Department immediately and reported the incident. After a bit of time, they arrived with another dorm's resident advisor because none of my dorm's resident advisors were available at that moment. And there were also one or two police officers. Around the time, the body had just suddenly got up on its own and wandered off into the distance, which was towards a parking lot, and at one point, they looked straight at me, not making any noises that could be interpreted through words, and they had the most bludgeoned nose I had ever seen up close. Since before then, I had only seen noses that bludgeoned in movies and other forms of media. But here, there it was, right in front of my face. Later, the people called an ambulance and they managed to catch the passed out person who was now wandering about, who we assumed was another student, and he got taken away in the ambulance. I stayed at the scene, but I never really heard much of the rest of the story of what happened afterwards, but the resident advisor would later knock on my door and made sure I was okay and gave me a bit of an upbringing for such a suddenly traumatic, okay, I'm not really sure if I'd go as far to call it traumatic, situation. When I moved into the second year dorm, I only remember the fire alarm going off once, and it was while I was in the bathroom, and it was also right at the start of the year, except this fire alarm was an absolute joke. Since if I wasn't aware it was a fire alarm, I would have not heard it at all. My upper class apartments have their own fire alarms, and they have only went off a few times, but each time someone usually stops it with a flap of their hands, and it's usually from too much steam from cooking chicken or something like that. Heck, I probably heard the fire alarm go off more in the building that had the cafeteria than the second year dorms and the upperclassmen apartments combined, not gonna lie. There was one time it went off while I was in the cafeteria 10 minutes before it closed, but I hadn't finished eating, and personal note for me, I hate wasting food. Anyway, once the fire alarm stopped and we were allowed to go into the building, it was past the closing time, but I didn't want the red velvet cupcake I hadn't eaten yet to get thrown away. So I ran into the cafeteria, grabbed the red velvet cupcake off my table, stuck it in my pants pocket, and got the hell out. All the while, about one or two cafeteria workers were trying to alert me that they were closed. Also, it wasn't even that early when this was happening, it was only 8 p.m. when this happened. But moral of that short story was that I would do anything to make sure a red velvet cupcake doesn't get thrown away. Anyway, now we have reached it. We have reached the two that take the cake for the most memorable fire alarm stories that I have ever witnessed in my life. Now, let me set the stage for the first of these two stories. I was in 7th grade when this first story happened. I was pretty nervous because I had orchestra adjudications that same day at another school in the district. This was also during a time where both of my siblings were still in school, and every member of the household was at a different school or workplace. I had already changed into my concert attire as a result of this, and had to dress that way for my last few classes before we left. One of the classes I had was geography, and for some reason I was taking a quiz or whatever, when out of nowhere, the fire alarm starts going off. You know, as it's supposed to. I evacuated the building with the rest of the class. However, I heard from some other group that it was actually because there was, this time, an actual fire. For context, my middle school was connected to an elementary school, and of all places, it was the second grade girls' bathroom that somehow caught fire. I don't even know how, but it took a damn long time for us to get back into the building. I believe I saw some fire trucks come to our school and extinguish it, but damn, it was a memorable experience. That surely was something to keep on my mind for the rest of the day as I went through the orchestra adjudications. Because these adjudications went past the school schedule, one of my parents had to pick me up themselves. That's not the end of the story, though. When I got home, I saw my brother playing Super Mario Maker on our Wii U, and I greeted him. I don't know how our conversation started, but pretty early into it, he told me, "I have been home since 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. or something like that." And he went on to explain that right at the start of the day, during the morning announcements, or something like that, the gym washing machine or dryer, I don't remember which one, ended up catching fire. I think I afterwards explained to him that a bathroom caught on fire at my school. I would later talk to my mom about the situation. She let me in on some other information about the other members of the family and their days. Specifically, like the 2 fires in the schools weren't enough, her work facility had to be evacuated due to a nearby building catching fire, and also, the fire alarm was pulled at the school my father worked at because someone ended up passing out in the hallway. My mother was getting these updates like rapid fire from every facility, and she mentioned how later that day, she called my sister, who went to a special needs school, where she mentioned people pull the fire alarm almost every day, and she was like, "Did anyone have to pull the fire alarm at your school?" And my sister was just like, "No, why are you asking?" And my mom said back, every other place somebody in the household went to today had a fire, or at least had the fire alarm go off. I might have forgotten some of the details throughout the times, but I still talk about this story from time to time when it comes up in conversation. It was utter chaos. That's basically all I can say about it. It was insane, crazy, bamboozling. And now, of course, I am saving the best and honestly most embarrassing story for last. Well, embarrassing for me. This one happened when I was only 10 years old, and a lot of the memories of it are very fuzzy. But here's what I can remember and explain from it. It was often tradition every summer that we would have a family vacation somewhere. We don't do it anymore because we started to grow disinterested as we all got older. Well, at least my siblings and me to an extent did. But something that my dad would often do when we did do these vacations back in the day was use them as an opportunity to meet up with some of his friends who live in the area. And that leads us to this story. For the year this happened, our vacation destination was our second trip to Disney World. This was about 4 years after our first trip, when I was only 6. For this year, we stayed in a log cabin, I'm pretty sure, but that's not super important to the story I'm about to give. So one of the days we went down, before we got to the log cabin, my dad decided to go meet up with one of his friends and said friend's family for dinner. And we went to this restaurant that is called something like, I don't know, Moe's Slab Rack, or something similar to that. Nevertheless, we went to the restaurant and we were sitting in an indoor patio-like area for our meal. I don't know what the hell I even ordered. I think I got milk, but that's all I can really remember. But I also was still a rather selective eater at the time, so I imagine it was something very simple. What I remembered most about the area we were sitting at, however, was just how very open and spacious it was, and I couldn't seem to sit still in it for very long without needing to move around, like the little skittish jumping bean of a person that I am. This ended up going against me after a bit of time. I was wandering around, and without meaning to, I accidentally leaned a little bit towards the big red door in the indoor patio area, and caused the ear-bleeding sirens to start going off throughout the entire restaurant. Out of fear and embarrassment, I didn't know what the hell to do, but as a 10-year-old, I decided to burst into tears. I think the staff eventually came to realize it was just some dumb kid accidentally pressing it, and they stopped the alarm themselves. My parents came over to calm me down. So, yeah, I guess I was a bit of a klutz sometimes back in the day. Which is kind of weird to say because I don't consider myself to be that klutzy of a person. I still think about this mishap well over a decade later, but at least now I can look back on it and laugh, so that's much better. I'm glad I can because I'm not usually the type of person who likes to be reminded of the stupid things I did in their younger years. Anyway, with those out of the way, that's where my fire alarm stories are going to conclude. Thank you all so much for listening or watching the video. If you enjoyed this type of video, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe if you see fit. Again, the background drawing isn't going to be posted on my socials because of the college project, but the next volume will have something of that caliber. And if you want to check out some of the work that I have made, my socials are again down in the description. Anyway, this has been SupernovaBlade, and goodbye.